From the game's mysterious beginnings to its somber conclusion, Scorn asks a lot of questions but provides very few real answers. Much of this gruesome tale of forgotten civilizations and parasitic monsters is left open to interpretation, and as a result, the ending isn't particularly satisfying. But that doesn't mean we can't try to solve some of its biggest mysteries. Although there is no definitive lore provided throughout the game's 3-hour campaign, there are plenty of hints to be found. Let's take a closer look at Scorn's story and conclusion. Naturally, there will be major spoilers for the upcoming game. Although Scorn's ending is perhaps its most shocking moment, there are several mysteries woven throughout the game that aid in figuring out what happened in that final scene. Let's go over each one before we get into what it all means. The parasite. One of the most perplexing questions in Scorn is who or what the mysterious monster is that latches onto the protagonist during Act 2. This creature quickly becomes a key part of the campaign, draining your health and killing you as you explore the game's labyrinthine city. It merges with the character as he activates the fan and gradually takes over his body. What exactly is it? It appears that the creature is the character we played in Act 1. Although Scorn never explicitly states it, it is strongly implied that the protagonist who explored the mine shafts at the start of the game is not the same character who wakes up in the desert at the start of Act 2. After blowing up the large organic tree structure in the first act, the liquid that drains from the fleshy mass appears to infect the playable character, as shown by tentacles covering his hands near the end of the chapter. The rest of the game implies that this transforms him into a parasitic monster that feeds on others. Several pieces of evidence point to the parasite's identity. For example, when the main protagonist first encounters the parasite in Act 2 and it attaches to him, he is immediately granted access to the bolt rifle. The bolt rifle was first picked up by the protagonist in Act 1, implying that the monster and the protagonist in Act 1 are the same person. Isn't there enough evidence? In the game's final moments, we're forced to surgically remove the parasite from our back while lying on an operating table. When you point the camera at the parasite, you'll see the shape of a man lying on his side, looking up at you. We left the Act 1 protagonist in this exact same position at the end of the first chapter, implying he's been stuck there ever since. Scorn is riddled with hints about the parasite's true identity, such as the fact that the protagonist in the second chapter requires a key implant on his wrist despite the fact that the protagonist in Act 1 receives one in the introduction. When you put the puzzle pieces together, it appears that the creature is the same entity we saw crossing the desert at the start of the game. What happened to the city? Scorn's labyrinth of flesh-covered architecture, acid-spitting monstrosities, and disemboweling parasites isn't the friendliest place on the planet. It's difficult to imagine someone arriving here and saying, "Yeah, this is definitely livable." And the reason for this is most likely because it was once very different. Despite the fact that we don't see a single humanoid character who isn't trying to rip us limb from limb, there are clearly echoes of a massive civilization here, one that built this interconnected labyrinth of highly advanced organic machinery and biocontraptions. So, unless one of those acid-spitting creatures got bored and decided to design its own grotesque, fleshy metropolis, what's the deal here? Although it is never fully confirmed, it appears that this city, which is entirely constructed of organic materials, has been hit by some sort of rapid infection. Mutated organisms sprout from every wall, parasites prowl the tunnels, and fleshy masses obstruct giant man-made structures. The best example of this is in Act 4, where a large creature consumes the elevator that appears to transport the people of the labyrinth to the rail system above, forcing you to infiltrate the monster and ride the elevator out through its brain. This world is essentially one large organism that appears to be infected by a parasite that is slowly engulfing and devouring it. What was happening during the final ritual? Act 5 sees the protagonist fight his way out of the underworld and to the surface, where he will use a rail system to reach a grand palace across the desert. When you arrive, you'll notice that it's not the disease-ridden underworld you've just escaped, but it's no less foreboding. When you enter the palace, you'll notice dead bodies hanging from totems around the central chamber, and the roof will be covered in fleshy, hanging tendrils. The lab downstairs, however, houses mutated fetuses, grenade launcher-wielding husks, and 2 pregnant bodies into which the player eventually transfers their consciousness. This palace appears to hold vital information about the protagonist's mysterious goal. The protagonist will return to the palace's central chamber and offer himself up to a mysterious machine after collecting 2 blood vials, injecting them into the pair of pregnant bodies, and successfully ripping the parasite off his back. The machine operates on him, cutting his flesh and tying his mind to the string of fleshy tendrils above. As soon as the protagonist is linked to the roof tendrils, he is able to see through the eyes of the pregnant bodies from earlier, using them to open a doorway through a mural of human flesh and walk towards an ethereal void. So, what does this tell us about previous civilizations? Although very little is confirmed, this chapter contains the most compelling hints about their fate. The dead bodies in the central chamber appear to be human. They've clearly gone through the same procedure as our protagonist, with tendrils sprouting from their heads weaving into the string of flesh lining the ceiling, These former residents appear to have transferred their consciousnesses while abandoning their bodies, connecting their brains to a hive mind. As the lab demonstrates, the concept of transferring consciousness appears to have been at the forefront of civilization's research as well. During the game's final battle, you must plant multiple fetuses into a variety of large organic husks found in the palace's sinister laboratory, with the fetuses able to control and pilot the husks. The idea was obviously to be able to control a stronger body, which the protagonist does at the end when he controls both pregnant hosts. Was this the civilization's plan of escape? Some sort of ethereal rebirthing, or even travel to a completely new world via the portal we see at the end? Or did they choose to leave willingly, leaving the world they created to rot in their absence? It's unclear, but the protagonist appears to have a plan in the final moments, attempting to complete the ritual before his goal is foiled. Given the number of bodies connected to the hive mind in the central chamber, it appears that at least some of the humans who came before them were successful in their attempts to complete the same ritual. Rebirth and Quat. Before we put everything together, it's worth noting the game's unwavering focus on the theme of rebirth. When the main protagonist in Act 1 is consumed, we cut to him emerging from a cocoon and yanking out an umbilical cord, almost as if reborn. Then there's the mine cart puzzle segment in Act 1, where we pluck an egg from a wall and break it open to reveal a helpless creature, effectively giving birth to it. Meanwhile, the parasite story arc revolves entirely around rebirth. The monster latches onto us and attempts to take over our bodies, rebirthing itself through us. The protagonist is then reborn into the two pregnant hosts after we arrive at the palace and the parasite is detached. The parasite, however, reappears, consuming the protagonist and forcing him to be reborn as a part of the creature. Rebirth is clearly one of the game's central concepts, with much of Scorn revolving around a cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Outside of speculative theories, there are a lot of blanks that will seemingly never be filled, but what we can decipher is that both of the game's protagonists have a single goal: cross the desert, reach the palace, and begin a ritual in an attempt to ascend. During the opening cutscene, we see the Act 1 protagonist attempting to cross the desert, falling into the labyrinth beneath the ground and eventually succumbing to the infection ravaging the subterranean city. We cut to the second protagonist after the first protagonist's story concluded. He also tries to cross the desert to get to the palace and is far more successful. During his adventure, he meets a malformed version of the Act 1 protagonist, who latches onto him and slowly consumes him. Over the course of the game, the parasite becomes increasingly vicious, transforming the protagonist into something inhuman. After a long journey through the labyrinthine city, the protagonist arrives at the palace, where he detaches the parasite from his back, but does not kill it. He is then subjected to a painful procedure in which his consciousness is linked to the palace's hive mind, granting him control over other beings. He begins a ritual with two pregnant husks, opening the door through a fleshy mural towards a mysterious portal that appears to allow him to leave the palace, much like the humans who lived here before him. The parasite reappears just as he is about to ascend, disrupting the ritual, merging with the protagonist, and growing into a massive mass of flesh. The main character is reborn, but not in the way he expected. He'll spend eternity rotting away as part of a monstrous mass of flesh and bone. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, subscribe or share with your friends. It really means a lot. See you in the next video. Bye bye.